The government says fundamentally what it's doing here with the Bibby Stockholm, possibly looking at Ascension Island, is removing the pull factors for people coming across the water. In The Sun, Robert Jenrick accuses Keir Starmer of thwarting plans to stop the small boats. The government will say that they are deterring migrants and that Labour are encouraging them.
Well, Jane, it's good to join you as always. Firstly, that's complete nonsense from the government. The government is completely failing in this area. They have 173,000 people now who are in the backlog in our asylum system. That's the reason that they've ended up having to use hotels and bases and now this barge. They are there because of their chronic failure. What they actually need to do is, instead of the gimmicks, instead of the headline chasing, they need to put a proper plan in place to get that asylum backlog down. In the first instance, rather than the £140 million they've spent so far on the Rwanda plan, and by the way, they've sent more Home Secretaries to Rwanda than they have people, they need to use that money for a new cross-border crime unit that could actually tackle the model, deal with the model of the criminal smuggling gang so that fewer people are going into that perilous crossing on the English Channel. Secondly, get the asylum backlog down, and do that by making sure you have things like fast tracking, where you've got returns agreements in place with, say, a safe country like Albania, speed those through the system. But thirdly, they need to get the returns agreements in place so that when people are found to have no right to be here, they can actually be returned. That's the kind of systematic approach the government needs to take, not just the gimmicks and the headline chasing that we've seen.
Well, let's move away from the gimmicks and the headline chasing. You want to stop the small boats crossings too, don't you? What time frame would Labour set to that? When would you be able to stop them, do you think, if you got into government?
Well, if we do have the privilege of coming into government, we don't, of course, know precisely when that would be. It's for the Prime Minister to call a general election. I wish the Prime Minister would do that soon, but I doubt that he will. So obviously, that time frame would depend upon the situation that we inherit. That could be 13, 14 months' time. We won't be able to say, I think, for certain what the extent of the backlog will be then. That's out of our control. One thing that is certain is that it will be chaotic. And there is going then to have to be the very hard work that is required. The plan that I have described needs to come into place. We'll put that into place as soon as possible. But we want to be in a position where we are dealing with this issue of small boats. One person risking their lives in those small boats in the English Channel is one too many. That would be our focus. That would be our priority coming into government. Unfortunately, though, the situation under this government just seems to get worse and worse.
So I'm not asking you, obviously, to give me a number for when you would get rid of the backlog, just for stopping the numbers coming across the Channel. And that doesn't depend on what the Conservative government do over the next year or so, does it? I mean, say a year into a Labour government, can you give an undertaking that you will have stopped the boats?
Well, with respect, it does depend upon what the government does, because if the government continues to fail to put the money, the 140 million that I've described, into tackling the people smugglers, then clearly that situation is going to get worse. So we don't have control over where the situation is going to be over the next 12 months, which is why I'm just being upfront and honest about that. We will have to inherit the situation that we inherit, but be in no doubt of our determination to prevent this situation continuing. It is a litany of failure from this government. People risking their lives in the small boats on the Channel, people coming here, their cases not being dealt with, the government having to move away from using the long-standing asylum accommodation that we've used for many, many years, to having to spend money on the barge, the hotels, the bases. This is a whole litany of failure, awful for the people in the system, and awful value for the British taxpayer as well. So it's obviously a huge priority of ours to deal with this when we come into power, or if we come into power, but we don't know the precise situation that we're going to inherit.
And Labour, Stephen Kinnock said yesterday that Labour would have no choice using, for example, the Bibby Stockholm barge. I mean, there'll be your critics who will say that why not change these policies as soon as you get into government? And actually, what you're doing now, it seems to many, is attempting to lower the public's expectations before you get into government, if you do.
Well, firstly, can I just say that in relation to the situation we inherit, we of course don't have control over what the asylum accommodation position is on the day that we come into power. We have to address the situation that we inherit. But our policy is to drive the backlog down so we don't have to use the barges, we don't have to use the bases, we don't have to use the hotels. And we can go back to using that long-standing asylum accommodation that was used for many, many years before. That's the hard work of driving this backlog down. And it's not a question of lowering expectations. It's a question of being open and upfront with the British public about the chaos that we are going to inherit, but also the direction that we then want to go in, which is best for those people trapped in the system, but also best value for the taxpayer too.
But people who you want to encourage to vote for Labour aren't going to vote for Labour because of a direction. They want specific numbers, they want specific targets, they want to know exactly what they can expect. And it seems very difficult to pin down a shadow government minister like yourself to any kind of number or target linked to absolutely anything in a potential Labour government.
Immigration, because we did have a situation in the first iteration of this government post-2010 when they introduced that numerical target in terms of net migration, of reducing the tens of thousands. They never met the target, and having that target certainly did not help with trust in the system and with this debate. So I think we're absolutely right not to be committing to a figure in that sense, because it's not assisted. But we are clear about what we want to do in terms of tackling the people smugglers, tackling the backlog, and also with achieving those returns agreements that will allow us to return to safe countries those people who don't have a right to be here. And it's also clear that we will be putting ourselves in a position to use the asylum accommodation that's been used for many years and not spending all this money, 6 million a day on hotels that's being spent. That is the cost of government failure.
Nick Thomas-Symonds, good to talk to you. Thanks for joining us today.
Yeah.